Yeah, so I think it's funny because it is sort of there's a lot of some sort of those I don't know if I want to call them stereotypical, but sort of things that you hear about happening with collections and things. So I had done a panel with Octavio and Natasha Jones and Miriam Williams, who are three out of the four of us are in the collection because we'd actually been in a collection that Octavio had co-edited with Miriam before called Communicating Race and Ethnicity and Technical Communication. So we had Cindy Self was our chair at that season. That was like 20, and it's crazy because I think it was like 2014 or something like that. Like it sounds really like a long, long time ago now because it kind of hits. But yeah, so it was one of those situations where a lot of us were more or less talking about the work we'd done for this book and this edit collection. And so it was funny though, because at the end, Cindy Self was still like, hey, like, this topic still seems like there's a lot there, and it would make an interesting, edit collection for CCDP. And so it was one of those things where, I think I probably do default to no a lot of times when there's sort of those cool opportunities. I'll be like, oh no, we already talked about this in this last edit collection. There's no way. But of course, like as giving some time to think about it. And I think Octavio, was he's more senior, so I think he was kind of like, oh no, he was ready to sort of talk through the ideas. And the more we did, we thought, yeah, there is definitely a lot more because I think even his chapter in the edited collection, there was sort of this focus on sort of like YouTube. There was mention of that. So I think, from that, my work was a little more on Twitter. And so there was still, this echoes already of sort of social media, online, online communication. So I think, there was definitely a lot more there. And then, as we sort of wrote up a CFP and started circulating it, it was one of those things where we started to get a lot of people, with ideas. It seemed like the wide range of ideas. And it was one of those situations, I think, even as we were just sort of getting them all together, we started thinking of like, what kind of taxonomy is there for creating these different, acknowledging this wide swath of the way people were thinking about these topics of just like online representation, and sort of race technology, like how, and and it tend to still fall into, I think, what they talk about in, digital humanities and digital rhetoric with this sort of the hack and the yak situation where we had a lot of people who were, doing more of the yak as the analysis, like thinking about like certain sites to analyze in terms of representation online. And then there was also those folks doing a little more of the hacking, thinking about like how are people of color already using these, multimodal like platforms and such like that. So I think we found ourselves sort of balancing out sort of, how are we sort of creating space for sort of both of those conversations to be happening, even though, we probably could have done one singular on one singular on the other. Fortunately, I think that was the nice thing about mine and Octavio's sort of relationship with sort of co-editors. Like I was probably leaning more towards the hack. He was like focusing on sort of on the analysis aspect. So we had that sort of balance where we were looking at those different kinds of submissions. And then, it was one of those things too, where like, my current research, one of the things I'm looking at is like citation practices. And partially because I'm the co-chair of the Latinx caucus right now. It's something I started a few years ago, probably back about the same time, was this Google Doc where it had a lot of people or asked everybody in the caucus to contribute their citations. That way we'd have sort of, a place where we could sort of an archive, as it were, to be able to reference each other's work and see like what already has been said. Because oftentimes we'd sort of get together in order to have these conversations, but sort of trying to create that platform online too, in so many ways. So, I think in what was something that's come up in that work is a lot of people a lot of scholars of color, who have kind of sort of seem apprehensive, yeah, about sort of publishing. A lot of this big perception is that, scholars of color only get published in either edited collections or special collections, and so, or special editions. And so it was interesting because I think we sort of experienced that when we, put out the CFP, because I feel like we had it out for only a relatively short time too. And we garnered a large amount, and number off the top of my head, I would say, a couple dozen at least, maybe 3 dozen, like sort of responses, and just knowing that, oh, we only have, we thought we'd have room for maybe a 10. And then of course, like when we get feedback from the press, they're like, ideally it's more like 7. And you're just sort of like, wow. So it's like, these hard decisions becoming more difficult. Like there were, of course, probably some proposals that like I hope that other people are like they're continuing to work on, even though they didn't go through. And I think that's one of those things, as sort of like a scholar, as you kind of go on your career, you understand some of those things people have told you in the past, like this isn't right for us, but we really hope, wish you luck with it. It's like, that when you hear that, it doesn't sound very encouraging, but like when you're sort of farther along and you've gone through this process, like really having to narrow down, you're like, oh, I want to read that piece still, like even if it wasn't actually going to fit in our collection or something. There's just a balance too, where we didn't want to have everybody talking about Twitter, and as someone who's written about Twitter, it was kind of like, no, like we want to make sure we're not sort of, probably focusing our scope too narrow too, just because like understanding that like if we're trying to think about representation, sort of analysis in that way, but we're also thinking about like positive uses and innovations and culturally relevant ways and practices, it's kind of like, okay, we're gonna have to open the scope up but here enough too. So it's like where mine can kind of be connected to sort of this tradition of like digital storytelling. It's like that is still very much different than sort of the translation or the technology of translation that Gonzalez is talking about. And then it's again sort of the cool stuff going on with hashtags. And then I feel like there's enough sort of diversity, and I think I think too, like hopefully it provides enough sort of points of access where if you have an interest in this topic, there'll still be something that hopefully somewhere to connect with it. One thing that I found myself thinking about more now that we're sort of through with it, and outside on the other side of it, is that we're I think it's really cool that our collection has like half of it is women of color are the ones who are the contributors, and that when we've heard that argument more recently of like we need to listen to women of color, we need to have we need to trust women of color. So like it's one of those things now that we're at it where we kind of look back and go like, oh, like I'm really happy that that's something that's definitely coming clear in our edited collection. And I think like part of that is the fact that like as we were sort of getting into this, it's like it's thinking about the topic of sort of digital writing, race, ethnicity, culture. It's like I think it's a field that like it's an area that like I know that more people have been working on since and it's something that an editor where you're like, oh, I don't have to write all these things too. Something that I try to sort of communicate in the trailer that I made for the digital collection is the fact that like like I'm using a lot of just like this home archive stuff of like, and kind of using my grandmother's voice as sort of this found narrative, where she's saying all these things back in early mid 80s. She's already in her like late 50s at this time. So it's kind of like it's like she's making these comments about like, oh, we're using this for this, like, oh yeah, no, this is what technology, this is what this video camera does, and it's all sort of like this discussion about the fact we're using this video camera and whatever, and it's sort of just getting at the fact that like I have been fortunate enough where technology isn't something where it's been enough part of my life and sort of part of like people around me in the sphere, so it's like. And then unfortunately now I live in Silicon Valley, so I can't escape. So maybe once again, that might also inform that too, but it's like, I think these are a lot of these practices are things that we're sort of already involved with. So it's like when I think about, sharing a Google Doc is something I think we all do. And then, fortunately though, it's like, I think I've been, also sort of fueled by, informed by sort of scholarship on sort of, decolonial archives, right? And like, Alan Cushman talking about, ways to decolonize these digital archives. And so thinking about, once you share this Google Doc and you start to have this collection of information, you're like, oh no, there's a lot more knowledge there, especially when, you hear these arguments about sort of why aren't people being cited, lack of citation. And, I've had these conversations with other scholars who will, say like, I just wasn't aware of, this scholarship being
Right.
there. And so it's like, you know, I think there's a certain, there's a certain merit to what they're saying in this argument. So I thought, okay, like for at least folks within the caucus, it'd be good for them to be, putting that there so we can all be aware of our work. And then, I think I've been trying to, we posted in a few places, like I think the caucus's website, a readable version online too, just to have that as, another resource too. So it's like, the organic nature of some of these projects that are just like, they're really practical on sort of the beginning stages. And then, fortunately, it's like once you start putting enough work into it, you're like, wait, no, man, this really is a thing. Like,
Yeah.
we went from like 100 to like 500, it helped. I had a research assistant too, to start really helping to fill in a little bit of that work. But then you start to see that and you're like, okay, no, like we have a good amount to discuss. And like we're saying at the same time, when people are really making these, outside of myself, making these arguments about citations, and then also just seeing the sort of trajectory of this argument. Like I already referenced Adam Banks, but it's like, he was making this argument back in his chair's address where he's saying, we need to diversify our works cited list. And it was like kind of one of those arguments amongst other arguments that people were like, whoa, wait a minute, what is he saying here? And that seems somewhat controversial, but, at the same time, it's like you see other people like Shirley K. Rose is making arguments about like the fact that talking and testifying by Geneva Smitherman wasn't really being cited at all compared to errors and expectations. It's like she points out like how talk and testify was pretty much on the same issue of like error in another generative way of thinking about error, and it was relatively ignored in comparison to Shaughnessy. So it's like, there is this, tradition of people having looked at how citation is, taken up. And then I think, folks have looked at it as like affect and, like, so it's definitely, it's been a part of our ongoing conversation. But then I think, fortunately, like I know in the communication and other places, they've been pointing out sort of like lack of diversity in it too. So it is a really relevant conversation. And like, once again, just sort of like, with technology just sort of being something that's, I think, in a lot of our lives, it's like we begin to see how, these sort of everyday projects can sort of become these sites of analysis and research. We're just saying like, why aren't we thinking about this? Or like what happens like when I do talk to people about the cool work they're working on, and if like this Google, this like the thing I'm working on in terms of just citations, it's one of those like as I do it, I go like, I think it's only gonna be an article, and then I don't know. I'm kind of in that stage where I'm waiting for it to sort of take shape in the right way too. So I probably would sort of discount the fact that it could be a part of more folks making arguments, like I'm saying, either for need to listen to more women of color, more arguments for like what ways are folks of color using technology. It's like I think there are a lot of conversations that it's also part of, and if more people are like wanting to take the lead and move forward in those conversations, like I think I would love to continue to be a part of that.